Good morning everyone, today we're checking out a brand new video from the Goji Center, but before I get into that, let me just ask all of you out there. Ever since you were a little kid and learned about dinosaurs, who hadn't ever had a dream of befriending a dinosaur, raising it, making it a good pet, or even just a companion in life? So then, let's hop into a time machine and see what if a T-Rex was domesticated by humanity. Let's hop in and see what Goji Center was able to figure out.
Could humanity take control of one of the greatest land predators that ever lived?
I would say
Would we
doubt
be able
it,
to
but
find
never know.
coexistence with the tyrant king? Or will we yet again fall victim to our own folly? Today on Goji Center, we dissect history and prehistory to get into the biological details of none other than the Tyrannosaurus Rex and see if we could turn this dude into man's best friend. Or we could just be making the biggest mistake of our lives. Goji Center presents, could T-Rex be domesticated?
Well,
True
let's see.
domestication, the act of genetically modifying an animal so it can behave and thrive alongside humans. Sounds really cool and all, but this isn't something every species can undergo. There are several
Honestly,
key traits
yeah.
that already need to be baked into a species to make remodeling it from a wild beast to a beast of burden even more feasible. For our
That's
scenario,
true.
let's assume that Tyrannosaurus Rex and a reasonable amount of other dinosaurs just went on existing after the Cretaceous, across time, and into the rise of humanity without changing into a new species.
I think there would still at least be one kind of change, considering the amount of oxygen would be decreasing after that kind of event, which is technically what led to the death of all the large reptiles. So if anything, they probably would be smaller than the fossil records. And so like those 20-foot ones? No. Oh, in alpha maybe 10 foot, but I'd say on average they're probably more in line to 7 to 8 foot.
This keeps everything simple, and means our ancestors from cavemen all the way up through the Ice, Stone, Bronze, and Iron Age had to coexist with such terrifying
Just make them
theropods.
force
After witnessing
height.
their
There you
prowess,
go.
their power, and the fear the tyrant kings could inflict hunting big game and going toe-to-toe with the mightiest mammals that ever existed, someone might have inevitably had the big brain moment of trying to figure out if they could turn this dangerous
This is
foe
big brain
into a
time.
friend and turn Primal into a documentary. So, could they? T-Rex here has to check all the boxes if he's going to ride into battle with humanity, let alone hang around our kids. So let's take a look at the first necessary trait for domestication.
Yeah, okay.
Condition number 1, intelligence. Living around humans means
Yeah,
you
okay.
need to be aware that these little bipeds are humans, a completely separate species that you now coexist with and tolerate at times. There's a good reason we domesticated things like dogs and sheep instead of snakes and jellyfish. Would a
True.
Tyrannosaurus be smart enough to acknowledge a human as anything other than potential food? Yes, actually. The specifics of dinosaur intelligence is a subject we may sadly never fully understand. We'll never grasp the full extent unless we invent a time machine and acquire some fresh brains to look at. That said, one of the reasons
True.
dinosaurs were once thought of as very
have
unintelligent
any
was the
idea about how
assumption that
intelligent it
brain-to-body
was.
ratio was the sole most important factor in determining intelligence. This logic works when you're comparing two members within the same group. A quick example, a human and an orangutan can have roughly the same body mass, but the human brain is roughly 3 times the mass and volume of our fellow great ape. Orangs certainly aren't dumb, but humans clearly possess higher intelligence than our simian cousins. If brain-to-body ratio was actually a fully reliable method of determining intelligence, we'd think, this T-Rex doesn't look that smart. But here's something about brain sizes you might find interesting. So the amount of brain power needed to control a 2-pound body and a 2-ton body isn't really all that different. This is why
Really?
the animals with the proportionally largest brains aren't
How much of a difference is it? Like only a couple of joules, maybe?
necessarily the smartest, but they
I
are
could
the
see that.
smallest. Things like tree shrews and even ants have way bigger brains compared to their tiny bodies than humans do to our bodies.
Oh,
So we can get
okay.
some idea of how intelligent a Tyrannosaurus was by instead looking at the absolute size of its brain compared to other dinosaurs. And with a brain volume somewhere between 200 to 250 cc, the tyrant lizard king actually has a fairly large one, by animal standards, at
By
roughly
animal
the same as a
standards, of
tiger's.
course.
And as a predator that had to figure out strategies to safely hunt prey over decades of a lifespan, with some specimens giving clear proof that they did exceptionally well at this, there's lots of evidence
is
indicating
true.
that T-Rex had both brains and brawn. Broadly speaking, it would be fair to
Why
assume
did that fossil look like it was almost made out of obsidian with how black it was? I mean, I'm not questioning about the blackness. I'm questioning why the hell it looks so damn cool.
Tyrannosaurus was roughly as intelligent as some modern-day predatory animals like canines, and carnivorous dinosaurs like eagles, both of which have shown more than enough intelligence to cooperate very well with human companions and trained to do some pretty complex tasks.
Ooh,
so it's fair to say a Rex would be a sharper tool in the shed than some animals humans have domesticated, like doves and chickens. So T-Rex meets the first criteria.
Didn't know that.
This might directly tie into the next domestication trait. Condition number 2, social hierarchy. If you can't get along with other things, then how do you expect to get along with humans? So, purely solitary animals, especially extremely territorial and aggressive ones, are almost impossible to domesticate. This specific behavior is something that can change very drastically even between closely related animals. We'll use a quick example before we go back to T-Rex. Humans have coexisted with species of zebra like Equus quagga for hundreds of thousands of years longer than we have horses, Equus ferus. So, why didn't humans come riding out of Africa on the backs of zebra before the end of the Ice Age?
That would have been awesome.
It all comes down to social behavior. Horses and zebras both form herds, but horses follow a hierarchy. The leader of the herd is the oldest and most experienced female called a matriarch. Her chief lieutenant to keep the herd peaceful.
No, I didn't. I wouldn't have actually believed that. Huh. I mean, I guess it is actually more common in nature and wild that the oldest and more knowledgeable female is often the leader. Well, huh. I also was expecting more like a traditional patriarchy, but no, it's a matriarchy. Interesting.
And together is her oldest son. So one of the ways humans domesticated horses was getting the trust of the matriarch. So she would follow the humans, and later on, human keepers could assume a hierarchy role as well. An organized herd can become a domesticated herd. In contrast, zebra herds, on the other hand, are pretty much just a stallion loosely grouped with a harem of mates, or just mobs that stick together just for safety against predators. Not much leadership is happening here, and every zebra looks out for themselves. And if they don't even follow their own kind much, they would never listen to a human. Following a hierarchy is something that's flat out essential for coordinating especially big and potentially dangerous animals like camels and cattle. And in this case, T-Rex. What did Tyrannosaurus have? This is one of those times where the fossil record is more of a Rorschach test than a definitive answer.
We have no idea.
There are certainly plenty of indicators that numerous Tyrannosaur species were social. Multiple individuals found together at the same site, different age groups feeding on the same carcass as shown by shed teeth and teeth marks, and a prolonged childhood, which would be useful for giving them time to learn from their elders. Some species were probably solitary and some were social. But if they did, it would probably resemble a modern pack of hunting dinosaurs, Harris's hawk. One of the larger species of hawks, the Harris's hawk organizes in family units like wolf packs, more or less. And throw any nonsense you heard about alpha, beta, and omega wolves out the window. That was disproven decades ago.
Oh, really now?
Packs are family units led by the parents with their growing children. The kids of prior years stick with their parents to grow up, learn techniques, and gain experience helping care for future offspring, babysitting their younger siblings, before they find their own mate and start their own pack. So, given this simple structure and how several fossil sites show young and old tyrannosaurs together, if there was any major social hierarchy in the tyrant reptiles, it was probably a bit like this.
I could see that.
Lizard kings sticking with their parents until grown. Let's give the benefit of the doubt and assume Tyrannosaurus was like this. And there might even be a way to play the system to get them on the side.
Dude, that Triceratops' tail had been degloved. Someone got a grip on it.
Of their human companions. Many bird species imprint on the source of noises they hear inside the egg before hatching and the first thing they see after hatching. If T-Rex had something similar, it might be possible that a human who finds, cares for, and is present for the hatching of a Tyrannosaurus egg would be mistaken for the egg's parent by the hatchling. No, seriously, what you saw in Dawn of the Dinosaurs could have more or less happened if Sid was human. But it would still take 3 decades for that juvenile to even grow close to full size. But playing the system like this and establishing themselves as the parent substitute might just work to satisfy this necessity for domestication. But, about that growth. That's where we have condition number 3 for domestication. It may or may not all fall apart right here. Condition 3, fast growth.
Well, that's
domesticated
rapid,
animals need to grow up fast. Not only does this make them more immediately useful for their human handlers, but it also means they need a lot less resources to reach that size. Cause let us remind you that you're the one raising this fella. This is domestication after all. Small carnivorous dinosaurs like
I just realized that human I'm using, is that meant to be Charles Darwin? Huh.
Velociraptor probably reached adult size within the first few years of life. The largest modern dinosaur, and one that is farmed, the ostrich, is practically full-grown within their first year. For domestication to work back in the days before genetic engineering, quicker growth means quicker generational turnover. The quicker you get those offspring to adulthood, the quicker you can figure out which ones have the right kinds of traits for sticking around humans. Like empathy, gentleness, paying proper attention, and social habits. Those will be the stock you will need for breeding the next generation to promote those traits more and more. The seasoned ARK players amongst the audience also have experience breeding the Rexes with the best stats. So, almost the same concept here.
I've never played the game, but even I understand it.
Essentially genetic engineering, just done naturally without using advanced technology to manipulate the genome in just the right way. As Dr. Wu himself put it, genetically there's very little difference between a wolf and a bulldog. But that tiny difference makes all of the difference as to why we can trust some of our
look at that bully.
far more than we can their wild cousins. It's also necessary to have the young grow up fast, so traits like aggression and seeing humans as
that was a leatherback sea turtle. Yes, those things are massive as all hell.
Potential prey could be spotted early and weeded out. A more powerful and aggressive tyrant reptile might sound cool on paper,
what the hell am I looking
would just
at?
be a liability being anywhere near its handlers. And that's where we run into our first issues. Tyrannosaurus might have taken nearly 30 years to reach full size.
Oh my god.
When it does, behaviors might change too much once it reaches adulthood. Remember how we said wolves often leave their home pack when they start their own family? Well, if you had a Tyrannosaurus that was raised from infancy and remained tame as it grew, seeing its human handlers as its parents, that might change if it starts its own family. The instincts to go out and strike up its own social hierarchy and raise its own offspring might cancel control its human handlers would have on it. For example, attempts at taming spotted hyenas have run into this exact problem. Female hyenas especially grow far too aggressive when they seek to establish their own clan, and even more docile male hyenas often have to be given suppressants to stay calm. A previously tamed T-Rex might also perceive other humans that didn't raise it as threats to its offspring and lash out. This is the big difference between domestication and taming. Domestication means genetic changes to the DNA-affected behavior and appearance of an animal so that it instinctively reacts differently around humans.
It would take a long time.
Passed down from parent to offspring. Taming, on the other hand, only involves changing the behavior of one single animal by trial and error. You might be able to tame a timber wolf, but it won't be as loyal, trainable, or safe as a well-trained dog, nor will it pass those traits on to its offspring.
That is true.
Why trained elephants are just tame, even after thousands of years of working with humans, not domesticated. If left to their own devices and behaviors, those elephants don't act any different than wild elephants. It might be possible to tame and train a Tyrannosaurus, and ancient civilizations in this scenario might be able to pull it off if they had enough resources and time for such a costly venture, and enough volunteers. But if we couldn't domesticate elephants, not much of a chance here. Tyrannosaurus is just too big, spends too much of its life potentially very dangerous to humans, and that social hierarchy might get upended every generation. But there might be a solution. So we're not the ones to just leave a fun scenario like this at a no and walk away. Remember how we said there are other tyrannosaurs out there. Smaller and more manageable species like the recently vindicated Nanotyrannus might be promising.
Maybe.
Hails from the same fossil formation and time that Tyrannosaurus did. If the Rex survived into the time of early humans in this scenario, this fella would too. Two species.
So kind of explain the difference for y'all that can't understand like the names. The Tyrannosaurus Rex literally translates to the Tyrant Lizard King. Nanotyrannosaurus would be the small tyrant lizard. Not a king though, because it's not a Rex.
Of Nanotyrannus are known: Nanotyrannus lencensis and Nanotyrannus lethaeus. These are smaller Tyrannosaurs, as the name implies, between 5 and 6 meters long and weighing in somewhere between 800 and 1,500 kilograms, depending on which measurement or study is used on what species. The 2025 study that helped prove these were indeed their own species also give a lot of insights to their unique biology. At a fraction of the size, but with a very developed brain, Nanotyrannus was probably about as smart as its larger cousin. But it was much quicker on its feet, very agile, and would grow to full size much faster than a Rex would.
Okay, I think we got it.
In the wild, these would be absolutely lethal to humans, given we would be right smack in the range of prey they would like to target. But if some enterprising humans figured out how the imprinting worked and got the big-brained idea to exploit it, they might be on to something. These species are far easier to house and feed, grow up faster.
And look at that! This thing is like more horse size, so you could actually use it like a mount.
And are just as likely to have a usable social hierarchy as their bigger cousins. It might start out small, with weak, young individuals being cared for by human handlers. Trying to brutalize them into service would get you killed, but careful rearing could create loyalty. If individuals were docile enough, they could be raised to adulthood and paired off with other calm individuals.
I like it.
Smaller,
yeah, here we go.
Be more easily contained and persuaded away from going aggressive when they reproduced. Generation by generation, growing up nearly twice as fast as the Rex, sorting out dangerous individuals amongst the nanos would be a lot easier and quicker to ensure the next generation is even more amiable to humans. If this sounds similar to what Hoskins wanted to do with the raptors, it's because this is the exact process used to domesticate small wolves into dogs. The problem that idiot ran into was mistaking taming for domestication and trying to push things way too fast. And well, look where that got him. It would take some hundreds, maybe even thousands of years for full progress, but the results could be astounding. Raised as tracking hounds, guards, and maybe even mounts for war and transport, Nanotyrannus anthrophilus, the friend of man, could prove a very useful domesticated beast across history. Because certain traits in animals tied with behavior can affect the appearance, these domesticated dinos would look a bit different than their wild ancestors, sporting a somewhat shorter muzzle, larger, perhaps even more expressive eyes, and greater amounts of feathers with many different coat colors. Those traits are more common in young animals, and this affects their behavior to where they stay bonded with humans instead of becoming too independent. It's the same reason dogs wag their tails and bark like young wolves do. This baseline original domesticated tyrannosaur would be roughly the equivalent to future breeds, like what primitive domestic dogs like the dingo would be for the varieties of man's best friend we see today.
We got it then.
New breeds like swifter mounts or keen trackers could be developed. But for the final part of this video, we can give you a taste of something that went from nano to giganto. With Tyrannosaurus and other large carnivores being potential dangers in ancient times in our hypothetical scenario, some civilizations started modifying their Nanotyrannus to even the playing field. While some domestic animals are smaller than their ancestors for easier management, there are exceptions. What started as tiny jackal-like scavenging wolves could be made into monster-sized mastiffs, and many a little pony that wild horses once were eventually had descendants that could weigh over a ton and be used for warfare. Size and strength would need to be carefully balanced with the right temperament, but eventually there could come a time where a tyrant king menacing a village might be confronted with another towering force. Species, Nanotyrannus anthrophilus, Goliath breed.
Oh, I love it.
3.5 meters at the hip. Length 11 to 12 meters, nose to tail. Mass 5,000 to 6,000 or more kilograms. The Goliath weighs in at nearly triple what its ancestor did.
It's an normal. I love it.
Warfare in times of conflict, status symbols of power in times of peace. The Goliath would be in the same weight class as some of the larger wild tyrannosaurs, at between 5 to 7 tons.
Hell yeah.
But still having more than enough agility to leverage its powerful jaws and large claws. And even if it found itself individually outweighed by a wild Rex, suits of custom armor and weapons given by human allies or assistance from packmates could tilt the odds. Something once small made mighty in parallel to humanity's rise. Here on Goji Center, the most powerful land reptile in history and most dangerous mammal of all time now both ride into battle.
Alright everyone, that is going to be the end of today's video, and I hope you all enjoyed this. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Link to the original will be in the description below, and I'll see all of you next time when we flick back on. Till then, this is Fox, signing out. Peace.